What's up, everybody? This is Moose and Brian here from OccupyFantasy.com. At Occupy Fantasy on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, a whole bunch of different platforms. That's what we're on. But I'm your host, co-founder, and data guru here at OccupyFantasy.com. Moose at CFB_Moose is where you can find me on Twitter. Here with Brian Jester at BrianJesterFF on Twitter. He's the co-founder and CEO of Occupy Fantasy. What's up, man?
What's up, Moose? Got a nice little early UFC slate to get some sweat going on a Saturday. Building some NFL lineups. Interesting slate tomorrow. Yeah, I'm super pumped. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I just came back from the eye doctor. My annual checkup. My eyes get very poor. They just get worse each year. It turns out, word of advice, guys, don't spend 20 hours a day on the computer for 25 years. Your eyes will hate you for it. But it's always funny. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I will not take that advice because I'm going to continue to do that.
I would say it's always funny when it's like even for me, contacts, it's like, oh, I can see well. I think I can see well. And then they're like, no, your eyes are even worse. Here's some new contacts. You're like, holy shit, I can actually see way better now.
Yeah, it's like that. Every year you get that feeling again.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if this is meaning that game stacks are going to start popping off because, I can see clearly now. But
oh, man. Wow.
Yeah.
What a transition, Moose. Well done.
Definitely. It took me a while to think of a transition for that, but we made it. So here we are, the Week 7 main slate DFS picks and some strategy. Let's just jump right into it, Brian. Game stack didn't do too hot last week. There's some good game stacks, I think, this week, but also some game stacks that, as written up in the Occupy Fantasy Daily Plug, need to take a different approach or not even play them at all.
Yeah, we've always struggled with this, with large favorites for game stacking. And, we've done some research and we found that it was kind of iffy on the large favorite front, playing them 3x1 game stacks in larger contests. That's why it's something we never really considered doing. It's why we always talked about playing both sides of a game stack if you're playing tournaments, right? If you're playing multiple entries, if you pick a game to stack, you use both quarterbacks, right? That's a little bit tougher when there's such a big favorite. You don't feel comfortable playing 3-1 Jared Goff stacks against the Rams. I understand that. And then fortunately, as we've talked about before, our friends over at Numberfire, they have access to FanDuel data that the public just doesn't. And fortunately, they publish a lot of great content around that data that they have. And Jim Sanas, who's one of the good friends of the show, he wrote an article this week showcasing just how rare it is for game stack slates to feature a big spread, and the numbers were kind of eye-popping, and so that was just nice to get a little more confirmation than what we already thought.
Absolutely. So Numberfire, don't sue me for putting this article up here on screen, but I'm actually going to put this in the chat as well, so if you all want to click and read it as well. But basically the table here shows that on heavily favored teams, the ownership is way more inflated than what their perfect rate is, if that makes sense, Brian.
Yeah, so basically what this table here, and again, Moose just put it in the chat, this table is, the left column is what their ownership is for the Sunday Million, and the right column is the chances of being in the optimal lineup. And now this is based on, the one thing you have to understand here, this isn't for all slates, right? It's not every slate, because we'll see some non-game stack slates, and a non-game stack slate could be a 3-0 stack, which we might see this week. And because in the way this article was written, it speaks to the way we play at Occupy, purely 3-1 game stacks in all tournaments, right? Especially in large field contests. And this just looks at the type of stacks and the size of the spreads only on slates where game stacks were optimal, which is what we're aiming for anyways, right? If a game stack isn't optimal, it doesn't matter to us because we're not going to win in tournaments anyways.
Yeah.
So when you look at this, only 4% of optimal lineups featured a large spread game stack winning slates. So for us, that goes to show, and obviously, we have to look at the base rate as well, and Jim did here, and about 12 or 13% of all games feature a big spread, and only 4% overall feature a big spread in the perfect lineup. So that leverage there just goes to show that we want closer games in our game stacks for tournaments.
Yeah, now, and it makes sense, because if you're talking about game stacking, double-digit favorites, they usually score a lot of points, but it's hard for that bring back to get there. It happened a couple times when I know we had the Miami run back. You and I both did, Brian, and we just couldn't get
Yes.
there because Miami couldn't fucking score anything. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And if you bring the plug back up, most if you switch back over, we'll hop back and forth here. Chris did a fantastic job of outlining this and kind of showcasing what you should and shouldn't do in different contest types at the top of the plug in the game stack section this week. And just because those large spread favorites aren't in the optimal lineups, we don't need optimal lineups for 100-player leagues, satellites, right? Smaller GPPs, multipliers. Like we just need, top 20% or whatever. And in the small field, you can certainly play those big favorites in 3x1 game stacks because you don't need to be perfect, and they have a pretty high floor and relatively high ceiling. Is where we need to thread the needle on the super large contests where we want to avoid those teams.
yeah, and you made it. We've always talked about this before in 100-player leagues. You can have a player in your game stack bust completely and still win or become very profitable just because you don't need to beat 300,000 people. You just need to beat another 99 people. Now,
Exactly.
I do actually have a question for you. It's still preferable to do the 3x1 game stacks in the 100-player leagues, but would you front someone if they only just went 3-0 for one of these large favorite teams, if they expect a blowout, just 3-0 stack, don't even bring it back?
I wouldn't hate it in some instances. This week I do hate it for 2 of the 3 games because in Arizona and Houston we have an underperforming wide receiver in Brandon Cooks, and he gets crazy volume anyways, right? So I would prefer the 3-1 if you play the Kyler side. Tampa Bay and Chicago, I understand Chicago has been pretty terrible, but they also have an underperforming wide receiver in Allen Robinson. So I would prefer a 3-1 game stack, and that kind of hints at Ed's question in the chat there. Allen Robinson, I know he's a tough name to click on given his production this year, but he is due for a breakout game, so I'd prefer there. The Rams in Detroit, that's the one game I could for sure see. If you want to play a 3-0 stack in smaller contests, you can definitely do it. You have our permission this week.
Nice. We won't send you to the guillotine.
Yeah.
But so we're talking about these heavy favorites, how you should and shouldn't stack them depending on your contest type. Let's take a look at some of the game stacks that Chris wrote. And again, we're here till 2:30, so if you have any questions, definitely go ahead and get them in the chat. The first one, I think everyone that I've talked to or listened to loves this game. The Chiefs at the Titans. I think the highest total game on the slate is going to be a popular game stack, but I can't find anything wrong with this one, Brian. Like it seems like everything lines up pretty well for this.
The only thing that's hashtag bad about it is how expensive everybody is, right? Mahomes, Tyreek, Kelsey, Henry. I will say though, right? Obviously, if we're playing this game, we're playing the Curtis Samuel theory. We're playing the cheap piece in our game stacks. If you use that, there are a lot of cheap options. Darrell Williams still underpriced, right? You have Mecole Hardman. You have, I think, a pretty sneaky option on Tennessee side, Nick Westbrook-Akina, because they're starting slot receiver Chester Rogers out. Westbrook-Akina is going to slot right in. He's 3,300 in a game where they should have to pass more. And surprisingly, so I haven't finalized my lineups yet, but I was running game stacks this morning in our builder, and it wasn't giving me 40% of some random ass 3K receiver to help fit in this game stack, which normally does happen. So I think we can make it work. Some of the cheap pieces that we allow into our 3-1 game stacks can make it work. And for a game with a 58-point over/under that has moved up a couple of points already since lines opened, and already has an 8-point edge or a 7-point edge over the next closest total. Yeah, we got to make it work somehow.
Yeah, and I'm actually just looking here, and I want to pick your brain a little bit here. So I pulled up the model in another tab. Tyreek with an OF index of 62, 8,600 on DraftKings, and projected for 16%. Mecole Hardman, 40 OF index, roughly half the price. Actually, I think it actually is half the price, but with similar ownership. So, how do you quantify dropping down from Tyreek to Mecole with using ownership or the OF index, and how are you justifying using Mecole Hardman as a Curtis Samuel piece?
Because the ownership makes it tough, right? It's normally we get those guys at 3%, but if a guy is 16%, yeah, I kind of agree with you that makes it really difficult. So for me, our cheap piece might be Darrell Williams, or our cheap piece might be the running back. because I imagine if people try to use Mecole Hardman, they're playing Derrick Henry with them, maybe AJ Brown. But yeah, I think that makes it tough, right? Because you'd have to get a little different if you're playing Mahomes and then both Kelsey. I mean, not both Hill and Mecole at 16%. That's kind of wild. But again, I'm trying not to think about this too much, most because you and I are going to talk about ownership today, and then on Tuesday during the $1 Million Mission, we'll bring it up and we'll see that less than 1% of lineups 3-1 stacked Mahomes, Hill, Hardman, and it's not going to matter too much anyways. But I do agree that that's kind of difficult to wrap your mind around when you have a Tyreek versus someone literally half the price at the same ownership.
Yeah, someone clipped this or at me on Sunday afternoon after the 4 o'clock games, so I can run the stack percentages and see what the stack percentage is for Mahomes and Tyreek versus Mahomes and Mecole.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, what's up, Willie? What's up, Leon? Ed also says if you were to run a naked Lamar with Chase, Mixon, and third piece, assuming Baltimore defense keeps Burrow under wraps, what do you think about that, Brian?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever talked about that type of stack ever.
The 0-3.
I mean, you could the 1-1. Yeah, I don't know there, Ed. I will say that game total has dropped 2 or 2.5, 3 points. It was definitely in contention for one of the top game stacks this week, given the fact that it's one of the closer games on the slate and two decent offenses. So, but anytime I see a game total drop that much, I'm completely out from a game stacking perspective.
Yeah, it's tough because you always say you need just one reason why to stack a game. Just look at that, and for me that's
one reason. That's one reason not to stack a game.
And so so it's weird. So it's like you can almost find something with that game. You have Lamar, you have a Burrow Chase stack, but then you also I like that game. It scares me. It's one of those things where it's like you build your lineups and you just feel absolutely disgusted, like those new DraftKings NFTs that are coming out. And
I'm glad you brought that up.
And I don't like it for lower risk contests or even like the 100-player or the 3 max leagues. I think if you're doing a 20 max or a 150 max, I think you could make the case for that game being in your stack. It's like I said, it's gross, but I think it can get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's a terrible game, right? I mean,
yeah.
the other games outside of Kansas City, Tennessee, all have their warts as well, right? Like if we see, I think all of this is above the paywall, so we can discuss anyways. But Green Bay, Washington, Miami and Atlanta, Philly and Oakland, the Raiders, like none of these games are amazing, right? None like are super high-powered offenses outside of Green Bay. So I get it. I think there's certainly some merit to it. Me personally, it's one of my high-level rules that we talk about, every single stream. But game total dropping 2 points, I'm not stacking that game. And again, maybe that'll work out sometimes, but over the long haul, we know that it doesn't work out generally.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I can see with that. My Fanalytics oversees your actual analytics.
That's fair. Totally fair.
Definitely. So, you spoke about the next game. We'll bring it up here. Washington at Green Bay. As Chris writes, Rodgers is the second highest ranked quarterback in our model this week. The ceilings for the Packers' big three is well known, but there's a decent one on the Washington side here as well with McLaurin, Gibson, and RSJ. The total of this game is modest, but we like the chances for it to overperform expectation. I also like this game as well, Brian. It seems like there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, whereas we talked about the past 2 game stacks. It seems like you have a very clear path on what you would have to take, but this game you can go 3-4 different ways.
Yeah, and to me, and again, it's one of those games I don't know if you can 3-by-1 stack the Washington side, but if you do, the nice thing is you can just run it. You only have to run it back with either Aaron Jones or more likely Devontae Adams because it's such a clear-cut opportunity distribution over in Green Bay. And the same thing goes with Green Bay, honestly, right? Like if you play a 3-1 stack, you really only have to run it back with McLaurin, or if you're getting a cheap piece, Ricky Seals-Jones, just because of their volume and their opportunity. So I think from just like the clarity perspective, it's a great game to stack. Will Washington sides get there? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, it's weird. Washington has screwed us, I think, every week in some form of Survivor, Pick'em, DFS, betting. Like they've screwed us. I don't think we've been on the right side of them since the week 1 Pick'em. But
no, we haven't. We actually haven't.
No, we actually haven't.
Why would it continue this week?
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. So other than that, the last game that Chris wrote up was Cincinnati Baltimore. We talked about that. What do you want to talk about next, Brian?
So there's other two games that I really like. That I normally wouldn't play. That kind of fall into that category, Moose, of us saying this game kind of fits. It's a little bit cheaper, allows us to fit in other pieces, and it fails like 99% of the time. However, on this week, when we get all those other big favorites, these games pop up a little bit, and their game totals are pretty decent, actually, right? Sometimes we talk about these games that we like under the radar, and the totals are like 44 or 45, and then
Yeah.
they're 44 or 45 for a reason. But the Vegas and Philly game and the Miami and Atlanta game, the totals are 48, 49, like legitimate totals, right? Not above 50, but there's only one or two above 50 this week anyways. So I really like those games. And if you look at the model, a lot of different pieces pop, and they're different. There's underperforming receivers involved. There are clear target trees. There are underpriced players. Cordell Patterson, whatever you want to classify him as. Lots of great options in those games. So I think those are probably my favorite game stacks. And I'm not as weary of them as I would be if the totals were a little bit lower.
You know, the moment you talked about Philly and Vegas, that game actually has popped up under my radar a little bit. I actually have that ranked in my rankings over the Green Bay Washington game. I think that can be a very sneaky stat. The fact that, like you said, the game total is 49, and I think that game's gonna be a lot closer than what people are gonna make it out to be. I think Philly's gonna be squeaking into my 150 tomorrow.
I think you have to, just because here are a couple things that I really like about it. One, because John Gruden left, and he obviously can't call plays anymore, not in the building. So their new offensive coordinator passed the ball more, used more motion, used more play action, all things we know that are great for quarterbacks production. All did that at an increased rate in his first game calling plays last week. So assuming that continues, that should be great for Derek Carr and those passing game weapons. Brian Edwards, underperforming wide receiver. Henry Ruggs, deep threat. We love those in tournaments. Darren Waller, not 19 targets like we saw in week one, but good target volume. And then the Eagles side, we have a clear number one alpha receiver, Devonta Smith. Miles Sanders, incredibly cheap. They expect him to get more carries this time around, more work. He's actually dominated opportunities in that backfield the last 2 weeks. And then probably the best play in the game is Dallas Goddard, who now Zach Ertz is gone. Goddard's price hasn't been adjusted. Now we get him as a top flight tight end without having to cede snaps or targets to Ertz. I mean, there's a lot to like about this game.
Yeah, like if you just take a look at the Occupy model for tight ends, you see Goddard has DraftKings off index at 45.3, up 12 points since opening. Yep. The next highest tight end, Kelsey, has an off index of 35, 10 points lower than Dallas Goddard. Like that's
pretty wild. Like we don't see that very often, right?
No, very rarely will you see a tight end over 40, and the fact that you see one, actually, yeah. So, of course, I'm just making sure I was correct here. Yeah, anything over 30 is classified as great, and the fact that he's over 40 is 45 is pretty nuts. So that at 4,600 could be your stack piece, your Curtis Samuel, your bring back. It could be a lot.
Everything you want it to be.
I think Dallas got, because I usually, in my player pool, I usually select no more than like 5, maybe 6 tight ends. I might drop that down, go a little bit more on Dallas Goddard, and see how that works out.
I like it. And Brian in the chat says Quez Watkins with Ertz gone. Yeah, and we saw this on Monday night where they ran a little bit more 3 wide receiver sets without Goddard active. You got to imagine it's the same type of setup here with Ertz gone and Goddard active. Yeah, Quez Watkins should get a bit of a bump if you're playing 150, 20. Yeah, Quez certainly qualifies as a cheap piece for your game stacks, although a lot of cheap pieces in this game. You get multiple cheap pieces. And the nice thing about these games was, right, it allows you to play one guy from those big favorites, another guy from those big favorites, and now you get all these high floor, relatively high ceiling one-offs from the other games while game stacking the closest game on the slate ideally.
Yeah, I know Chris talked about Derrick Henry. He's 9,200 on DraftKings, 11,000 on FanDuel. Very hard to fit in with an expensive stack. So again, I'm just throwing words out here. You can tell me if I'm wrong and cut me off. But you could go someone like Goddard, 4,600 on DraftKings. If you wanted to galaxy brain it, you could go like a Quez Watkins, 3,900. I don't know if two Curtis Samuel pieces in one game is optimal. Then you go with Derrick Henry. Now you have a chance to put in like a Devontae Adams, like stud players around them.
Or if you're playing Henry running back with Tyreek on the other side, and you get a little 1-1 mini stack. Like there's a lot of options this week to do that, and I think, just honestly seeing the FanDuel article just kind of just opened our eyes to everything we kind of already knew and just cemented everything we thought of. And then this week, all the stars are kind of aligning to put that plan into place.
Yeah, I mean, who knew data can help you make decisions?
Yeah, well, go figure, right?
Exactly, yeah. So 10 more minutes here. Ed says Hurts is expected at 17% on DraftKings. That's what the model says, and yes. I actually haven't checked.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, let me take a look here. So Hurts, we got 70% on DraftKings. But you got to figure it's a smaller slate. Not a ton of stuff. I guess, Mahomes, Lamar, count as studs, Kyler, and then obviously, Aaron Rodgers. All those guys blow out potential games. Hurts playing in a close game and obviously just rushes for 2 touchdowns every single freaking game. So no surprise that he continues to get some decent ownership. But again, most were not worried about that in tournaments.
Exactly, yeah. You figure if you have Hurts at 17%, literally anyone else, like even if they're like 50% owned, you're dropping it down to like 1%.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, I just did some simple math. Yep. Cool. So one thing we don't normally talk about is some defenses, and I know we normally just say go to the top of the model, but I think we had a couple questions in Discord about defenses, and I've seen some things on Twitter. Baltimore's at the top. I don't necessarily like them because, again, I'm a Cincinnati fan, but also because I think it's going to be a lot closer game than what people think about it is. And especially with these huge favorites, what's your thought process about defenses this week?
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? I think it's kind of wild to see that the top 2 teams in our model aren't those massive favorites from a defensive perspective, right? You would expect Arizona, Tampa Bay, Green Bay. Am I missing one more? Oh, and the Rams, right? You would expect those teams to be incredibly popular near the top of our model. But again, they're pricey for a reason. And these other teams that are kind of in that mid-tier range are a little bit better options, help you save salary. On a week, we know that some of the positional players are pretty expensive. So Carolina is a great play. Honestly, sub 5% on both sites. And pretty affordable. We know they can pressure the quarterback, and the Giants are just missing like every single player on offense. So the Panthers are one of the top defenses in the league by just like a variety of advanced metrics, and even just like surface metrics. And the fact that we get to put a team like that into our defense slot at less than 5% against Daniel Jones and just like a crew of backups, like that's an excellent spot to be in.
Yeah, and something we don't talk about a lot is that very last column in the defense model, spread percent. I know we always say fade the public and a bunch of fancy words, but if I can see a top defense at the model, again, at less than 5% ownership, but I see 86% of the money, or the tickets in this case, are on them, that also looks good for, like, I like that. When I see a bunch of people betting that team, I think that they think that team's going to win. Maybe I'm being very Joe Public about that, but it's something to look at.
But when it doesn't translate to the ownership, that's causes you to raise your eyebrows a little bit. Like, what, why is, because normally spread percentages like that are a pretty decent indicator of a defense ownership. And when there's a disconnect like that, this just tells me that people want to play those large favorites whenever they can. And the fact that Carolina is not is kind of a spot that the DFS community is overlooking a little bit. Big fan. They're the top defense on DraftKings for us, second on FanDuel. You got to love it.
Yep. Third on FanDuel, actually.
Third on FanDuel.
Yeah. And again, the fact that we talked about like the salary savings, it's actually pretty huge. Again, if you're stacking an expensive piece, you got to save salary somewhere.
Right. Exactly. Before we get out of here, should we talk about running backs? We've been talking about each week the different strategy into playing running backs, the stars and scrubs, mid-range, low salary guys like last week. Should we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. I just try and jam Derrick Henry apparently because he's going to get 40 carries for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns every game apparently. I
mean, the model hates Henry. It has hated Henry because of his lack of usage in the passing game. But the model is even like, all right, man, forget it. We'll just put him at the top just because he's going to keep doing this, right? The model is always looking for regression, reversion to the mean. This is Derrick Henry's mean. And the model is just like, you know what? We'll accept it. And it's put him at the top in both FanDuel and DraftKings. So Um, so it's pretty crazy to see that. And then to me, it's after this is the mid-range week. Again, I think we're back to that again because after Derrick Henry, we got Chuba, Mixon, Fournette, Josh Jacobs. Chris is gonna hate me, but Cordell Patterson, like all in that 6K range. And then we got some cheapos like Miles Sanders, Darrell Williams a little bit. So, I didn't mention Darrell Henderson, 6,600. So, yeah, this definitely looks like the mid-range week. Get 2 or 3 of those guys in all of your lineups. Try to pay up for Henry if you're getting cheap elsewhere. But it's an interesting slate for sure.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have Derrick Henry 9,200, and then the next closest person is like $2,000 less than him.
Pretty wild, dude. It's actually insane.
So it's 9,200, 7,500, 6,600. Like,
I mean, on FanDuel, I mean, this shows the times that we're living in. Derrick Henry is 11K on FanDuel, which is like insanity. Aaron Jones, fine, 8,500. That's still $2,500 less. And then the third most expensive running back is Cordell Patterson, which we should probably talk about a little bit because you and I have just like made fun of Cordell Patterson's production so far this year, getting so many touchdowns on so few touches. The model was like all over him this week, especially on FanDuel. And I think the reason is, I was talking with Chris earlier, it's like he is dual eligible on FanDuel, running back or receiver. And, that's a little less opportunity cost because you can fit him into whichever position you want. Sure, 8K is like fucking absurd for Cordell Patterson, but it's a game environment we like, and they've shown to get him touches, high value touches in the red zone on deep shots. And now he's 2%, which is probably fair because he's fucking 8K again. But like 2% for a guy that's near the top of the league in touchdowns scored. I can't believe I'm saying this, but sign me up.
Oh, goodness gracious. I was just looking here. Yeah, projected for 23.5 weighted opportunities. Not awful. Kind of in that mid-range pack. I don't hate it. I mean, anytime you get a 2% person player with such a high explosive opportunity, the opportunities that he gets, like he converts really, really well. You might get 3 carries, but 2 of them are going to be for touchdowns.
Like your average projection system isn't going to like him, but you gotta look at just where he's getting his touches and how he's being schemed up for his touches. And I mean, we can't forget that he's on his head coach's fantasy team, right? That's got to count for something.
I feel like that's got
to be illegal, dude.
Yeah, it's got to be some sort of
fucking illegal.
Yeah, but
I don't know. Did you see the sideline clip of Arthur Smith and Cordell Patterson?
No,
because like I can't remember. I don't think it was the London game. I think it was the week before. They drew a play for CPAT. He obviously scored because he scores on every touch. And then Arthur Smith came over and like tapped him on the helmet. Was like, "Yo, good job. That's gonna help my fantasy team." And everyone just like went nuts on Twitter because no wonder Cordell Patterson's featured in this offense because he's on Arthur Smith's fantasy team.
I guess I gotta write a new script and just get all the owners and coaches' fantasy league teams to see who's on their team.
Yeah, seriously, that'd be huge to know.
but what it actually what CPAT reminded me of is something that we do for NHL. And that's kind of like the high danger opportunity chances where a skater, we look at skaters who are shooting really high quality shots, which usually translate into goals. And I feel like that's kind of how CPAT is. They're putting him in places where he doesn't get a lot of shots or opportunities, but the opportunities that he does get are like high danger in terms of he has a really good chance to do something for a lot of points.
Right, either being in the like black zone, like 5 or 10 yards and in, or the targets he's getting, the average separation between him and the defender is much higher than most of the other receivers in the league or running backs in the league, which adds to that potential chance of getting a touchdown. So that's a good comparison, Moose.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if Next Gen Stats actually has him for
separation.
Yeah, no, he doesn't have enough targets to qualify.
That's actually perfect.
Yeah,
like near the top of the league in touchdowns, but doesn't qualify on targets.
that's actually hilarious. So, all right, so it's 2:29. If we don't have any more questions, Brian, is there any last lingering things you want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, just an interesting week with the big spreads. Make sure you read the plug. Chris did a great job breaking down which stacks to use and which types of contests this week. Let that be your guide. It's another mid-range running back week. We got some decent underperforming wide receivers that we want to play. So I'm excited for this week. We commiserated on Tuesday, but now I'm back in the zone and ready to go this week.
Absolutely. Let's get it, guys. So until next time, Moose and Brian here from Occupy Fantasy. Have a good night.
Peace.